Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely shatter some of that lingering nostalgia we all have. When we think of the 1950s, we usually picture this booming post-war economy defined by quaint, thriving little small businesses. But today, we're going to deconstruct the massive industrial shift that actually occurred during that decade. We're talking about a drastic, undeniable transition from independent mom-and-pop operations to sheer corporate dominance. So let's dive right in by asking a foundational question. Does our picture-perfect, idyllic image of a 1950s American Main Street actually reflect reality? Or was something much larger, and honestly much more systemic, happening right behind the scenes of those local storefronts? Well, the truth is, the very fabric of the American economy was being aggressively rewritten. The hard data tells a totally fascinating story. According to some really comprehensive historical research from the Becker-Friedman Institute, we can track a persistent century-long rise in corporate concentration. We are always so quick to blame modern tech giants for market consolidation today, right? But the data actually proves that across manufacturing, services, and retail, the sheer scale of business was aggressively compounding decades ago. In the 1950s, that was a prime accelerator for this massive shift. To really wrap our heads around this shift, we're going to explore four key arenas today: supermarkets and franchises, closing the merger loophole, defending the independent owner, and the age of the organization man.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, supermarkets and franchises, and how they completely transformed the physical landscape. To see how this macroeconomic data trickles all the way down to the street level, we just have to look at how people bought their daily bread. It was about to change forever. Think about your traditional grocery store back then. It was a high-touch environment. Staff literally boxed up items right at your request, and they relied heavily on local produce. Now, contrast that with the new supermarket model championed by giants like Safeway. They brought in this crazy new self-service model offering up to 10,000 individual items. Just imagine walking from a tiny local grocer into a cavernous warehouse with that kind of selection. It was absolutely revolutionary. By prioritizing low-margin, high-volume efficiency, these new supermarkets essentially pushed out local suppliers and displaced the neighborhood corner store entirely.
To really understand how jarring this was for the average person, listen to this quote from local Nebraska resident Don Freeman. It perfectly captures the initial consumer disbelief. People genuinely thought that a massive, impersonal 24-hour operation could never, ever replace the familiar neighborhood store where everyone knew your name. But, as he noted years later, with a heavy dose of irony, well, that's been 45 years ago. Yeah, they were completely wrong.
And hey, it wasn't just groceries either. The restaurant industry was experiencing its very own structural earthquake. Enter Ray Kroc and the McDonald brothers. They fundamentally revolutionized the dining landscape using three exact steps. First, they created highly efficient kitchen technologies. Second, they implemented incredibly strict, replicable systems for operations. And finally, they franchised that standardized model nationwide. Local diners simply didn't stand a chance against the blistering speed and machine-like consistency of this new corporate model.
All right, moving to Section 2, closing the merger loophole, which became a massive legal tug-of-war.
So as you can imagine, this massive wave of consolidation triggered a legal arms race. By 1950, the government realized they had a huge problem on their hands. Now, the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 prohibited anti-competitive stock purchases, but shrewd corporate executives found a glaring loophole. They just bypassed the stock entirely and bought up a competitor's physical assets instead. Congress eventually had to step in and pass the Celler-Kefauver Act specifically to patch this asset acquisition loophole.
But corporate managers are nothing if not adaptable. Because this new 1950 law aggressively blocked horizontal mergers with direct competitors and vertical mergers with suppliers, executives pivoted. They began pursuing conglomerate mergers. This basically meant aggressively diversifying and buying up completely unrelated industries. It was a genius, albeit sneaky, way to continue their massive expansion without triggering antitrust alarms.
Academic analysis actually reveals that the government was working incredibly hard to stop vertical mergers, to prevent high barriers to entry for smaller, non-integrated firms. But here's the wild part. This strict enforcement accidentally funneled all that corporate ambition into a single legal avenue. It made the sprawling, diversified conglomerates the absolute dominant form of corporate expansion as we moved into the 1960s.
Which brings us to Section 3, defending the independent owner. This was basically the government's lifeline.
A 1953 Maryland Law Review document really highlights the panic happening at the highest levels of government. On July 30th of that year, the Eisenhower administration championed the legislative creation of the Small Business Administration, or the SBA. It was deliberately designed as an administrative counterweight. The whole point was to encourage private enterprise and serve as the official champion for the little guy who was just getting squeezed out by these national chains.
So how did they actually try to help these independent operators survive? The SBA deployed 3 core functions. They provided access to credit at reasonable rates, they fought to secure government contracts for small businesses, and they offered management counseling. The government was essentially trying to artificially recreate the scale advantages of a megacorporation just to keep the neighborhood dry cleaner or corner store alive.
Finally, we've reached Section 4, The Age of the Organization Man, which explores a profound psychological shift in the country.
Beyond all the economics and the shifting laws, we really have to look at the deepest, most enduring impact of this era. In 1956, author William H. White published a groundbreaking analysis where he identified a massive cultural shift. He contrasted the traditional Protestant ethic, which celebrated fierce individual entrepreneurship, thrift, and competitive struggle, with what he called the new social ethic. This new mindset was totally different. It demanded corporate conformity, group adjustment, and essentially legitimized the pressures of the organization over the autonomy of the individual.
A contemporary review of White's book noted a really chilling reality. In modern industrial society, the individual was tending to wither away. People were becoming conditioned by their schools and motivated almost entirely by large merchants. As corporations grew in sheer size and inertia, the fiercely independent business owner was rapidly being swallowed whole by the sprawling, comfortable bureaucracy of the corporate machine.
And that brings us to a final, provocative thought. There is absolutely no denying the incredible efficiencies, the low prices, and the sheer conveniences we gained from the 1950s corporate revolution, from the sprawling aisles of the supermarket to the blistering speed of a franchise drive-thru. But as you process everything in this explainer, you really have to ask yourself, what was the true, lasting cost to the American spirit of independence? Thanks so much for tuning in, and remember to always keep questioning the history behind the storefronts.